Hello, AP World students. This is Mrs. Mathers coming to you today with a screencast on Chapter 7, The Increasing Integration of Europe with the Wider World. As you might notice on this picture here, we have a clergy and we have a king. And part of what this time period involves is a struggle between the church and the state for control, for leadership in Europe. And we'll see this play out through this time period called the High Middle Ages. This will take us to about the year 1300 in Europe, or a little bit after that, before the plague hits Europe and causes a massive reshuffling of political, economic, and social life in Europe. Okay, so let's first of all talk about what's going on in the Byzantine Empire beginning in the 11th century. First of all, we have the theme system falling apart. What happens is that aristocrats are taking land from people who die without descendants. And this is leading people who end up becoming dependent farm laborers because the aristocrats are getting large land holdings. Tax receipts decrease, and so the Byzantine Empire starts losing money from the loss of tax revenue. The Battle of Manzikert is actually really important. One of my history teachers said this is one of the dates that you have to remember when we're talking about the history of Europe. 1054, as you all know, is the Great Schism. 1071 is the Battle of Manzikert. Some people call this the beginning of the end for the Byzantines. The Byzantine army was defeated by Muslims at the Battle of Manzikert, and eventually Byzantium will fall to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. So that is a really big turning point in the history of Eastern Europe and Byzantium. Additionally, there are foreign challenges. So the Byzantines had been in southern Italy, and the Normans invade southern Italy. Remember, the Normans were the Vikings, right? They get into southern Italy, they kick out the Byzantines. Additionally, I mean, they just can't get a break. Constantinople is sacked in 1204 by Crusaders. We'll talk about Crusaders later on, but these were Western Christians. They sacked the city. They actually took control of the city, and even though these were fellow Christians, didn't matter to them. Sometimes the Crusaders just really got out of control, and actually the Byzantines got back into control in 1261. Before you know it, the Seljuk Turks take over most of Anatolia, and then, as I mentioned, the Ottomans capture Constantinople in 1453, almost exactly 1,000 years after the Visigoths sacked Rome. So we're going to look at the regional states of the High Middle Ages in this PowerPoint, and you can see here that we're developing a foundation for a lot of smaller countries. Instead of the vast Roman Empire that we had in the past, now we're setting up these smaller regions that will end up formulating eventually into the countries of Europe that we are familiar with today. So first of all, let's talk about the church in the West. This is really, really, really important. All the clergy were under the authority of the Pope in Rome. This is in all of Western Europe. So under the Pope in Rome, we have the cardinals. The cardinals are known by having the red robes. I don't know if that's why they're called cardinals or not, but they are sort of the next in line under the Pope. Under them are the bishops. The bishops actually have several priests that work under them, and the priests are the people that have contact with the local people. And sometimes the cardinals, and certainly the Pope, is far removed from what's going on in the local life of the people. It was the priests who administered the sacraments and important religious ceremonies. We'll talk more about those later on. It's important to keep in mind we have a lot of fracturing in Western Europe at this time. The church is definitely the unifying force. If there's one thing that people have in common, it's the church. So now let's start looking at some of these empires. The Holy Roman Empire is in what we call now Germany. Otto I of Saxony established the kingdom of the Holy Roman Empire in northern Germany. The military, and if you go back and look at the map a couple slides, you'll see the military advanced into Eastern Europe. They twice entered Italy to defend the Roman Catholic Church there, and then even in 962, Pope John XII crowns Otto Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. This sounds like who? Who did this happen to? Who did the Pope crown Emperor? Charlemagne. If you thought of Charlemagne, you're right. Now, what does this do? What does this tell us? This tells us that the Pope believes that he has political authority. He has the authority to crown Otto emperor. And this is typical of the papal attitude through the High Middle Ages, is that they had great political influence. What happens in this time period is something called the lay investiture conflict. This is in the Holy Roman Empire. So what would happen is that kings would appoint bishops. Keep in mind, a bishop is like somebody who oversees several local parishes. Now, the bad thing about kings appointing bishops is this became highly, highly political for them. They were appointing their friends. They were appointing people who they knew would serve them. And sometimes they even appointed people who couldn't even read Latin. How could you be a bishop if you can't even read the liturgy of the church? And so this greatly upset Pope Gregory, and he said, no, we're not going to have this anymore. I have absolute power over the church. I will appoint the bishops. Well, the Holy Roman Emperor Henry, he protested. He's like, nope, I want to keep appointing my bishops. But what ended up happening was that the Holy Roman Empire princes didn't support Henry, and they rebelled against him, and he was actually excommunicated. Now, you know what that means? That at that time, Henry, you're going to hell. That's it. You're going to hell. You're excommunicated. You're not part of the church. Your eternal soul is damned. So Henry is forced to beg for mercy to the Pope. He stands in the snow for 3 days in a window below where the Pope is. He begs and begs and begs, please take me back into the church. Eventually, the Pope had mercy on him, and lay investiture ended. Now we have Frederick Barbarossa. He is the red beard, and as you can see from this picture, he had quite a regal red beard. He threatened the Pope's power by trying to take Lombardy in northern Italy, but he did not lose because the Pope sought aid from other states to fight Barbarossa and force him to back down. What's important about Frederick of Barbarossa is that this is just another example of papal authorities dominating political affairs, and again, defeating Frederick Barbarossa's attempt to expand into northern Italy. And keep in mind, we're going to talk about the papal states in a minute, but the papacy is centered in Rome, which is sort of central Italy. We have regional monarchies develop, and this would be in France. In 987, Hugh Capet succeeds as the last Carolingian empire. So remember, we have Charlemagne, and we have the Carolingians. We have the empire divided into three, the grandsons of Charlemagne, and Hugh Capet is there as the last Carolingian empire. He expands France out from Paris and centralized the government by the 14th century. Now, we're actually going to cover the 100 Years' War in more detail in Chapter 9. It used to be included in this section, but let's just save that for Chapter 9 for now. We have regional monarchies developing in England. So remember, we have the Normans. The Normans are the Viking descendants, and they are in that top northwest area of France. They are just across the English Channel from England. In 1066, the Norman king William the Conqueror, pictured here, invades England. And so now we have two Norman kingdoms. We have northern France, that northwest corner of France, and England. This is going to be Norman England. The kings will be descendants of the Vikings. In 1215 CE, King John will be part of the authorship of the Magna Carta. I actually got to see an original copy of one of the, I believe, 5 copies of the Magna Carta that was written in 1215 when I went to Washington, D.C. It's under glass. It's very faint, but there were a couple of important things that came out of the Magna Carta. One of them was no taxation without representation. That was a rallying cry of the revolutionaries in America, right? A Bill of Rights was included in the Magna Carta, and in 1265, the first English Parliament was established, and that would give people representation throughout England. It was really, really an important event. Other regional states that pop up during this time are in Italy. Several influential states develop, and you can see them on this map. They would include Florence, Bologna, Genoa, Milan, and Venice. I've been to Florence. It is actually like unbelievably gorgeous, and the artwork and the statuaries from that time are still there. They have held up over all of these hundreds of years. The Pope rules what are called the Papal States in central Italy, and you can see those in the light yellow on the map. I already talked about the invasion in southern Italy of the Normans in 999 CE. This was supported by the Pope, and they conquered the Byzantines and the Muslims. In Spain and Portugal, we have Muslim control from the 8th to the 12th century through much of Spain and Portugal. We'll talk about the Reconquista in a little bit, but gradually the Christians will reconquer Spain and Portugal, and they will become Christian again. All right, so I'm going to continue on for just a little bit here. We have, I'm going to move my picture up here, economic growth, particularly through agriculture. Now, a lot of the lords and the nobles at this time liked to have their hunting land, but they came to understand that having something called arable farmland was important because you could feed more people by making your land into crops. So arable land means land that can be farmed. They developed new crops, including beans, along with wheat and other crops that would provide a varied and more diverse diet. Technology was really important. What they learned was that they needed to have a fallow plot of land. That means this is resting. They needed the autumn planting and the spring planting. And then each year they would rotate that. And so then the fallow becomes the spring planting, the autumn planting becomes fallow, and the spring planting becomes the autumn planting. So as they rotate the crops, this is really important for maintaining the fertility of the soil. Let's talk about horseshoes. Horseshoes were a hugely important invention. Horseshoes are made of metal. Now, when you think of the hooves of a horse, think about fingernails. Think about wet, dense, muddy land in Europe. Horses are native to the steppe lands where it's dry. They're not native to wet, muddy lands. Now think about sticking your fingernails into wet mud day after day after day. Your fingernails will crack. They'll get infections. You might lose your fingers. You might die from a bacterial infection. So the development of horseshoes in Europe was really critical for preserving those ever important horses, and it kept their hooves from becoming cracked and infected. The heavier plow is going to allow for a deeper tilling of the soil, and the harness is going to be what the heavier plow is actually connected to. And then water mills are going to be really important for delivering water to various parts of the land. So agricultural technology is going to have, as you can imagine, effect on population growth. So we have urbanization, we have this increased food supply, we have population increase. As a result of this, wool and textile production is one of the specialties that occurs because wool from sheep is very prevalent. And then there are also textiles as well, but wool is the thing that Europe became really well known for. Um, the Hanseatic League developed. This is in the North Sea and the Baltic region. This is, and I'll show you a map later on, but connects the Mediterranean and Asian trade routes to Northern Europe, including Scandinavia. And then Mediterranean trade is going to connect the Italian city-states to the Islamic empires. This is also going to be important in the process of urbanization. And then finally, we have improved business techniques. So one of the things that it develops are letters of credit. Now, these come from institutions that are like early banks. So the bank will provide the letter of credit to the lender and to a borrower rather, and then they can pay back that letter of credit after they do their trading, wherever they do the trading. Limited partnerships with other merchants develop. So let's say you and I want to have a partnership. We are weavers. We want to sell our cloth. And by going together, we limit our liability. And what's really great is that now we have a limited liability of the partners to the extent of the investment. So if I invested 20,000, that's the most that I could lose. So limited liability is really important. Even today, it's really important. And then we have commercial partnerships that develop as well, which will spread out the liability even more. That's the end of part one.